The forest stretched wide and deep, ancient trees blanketed in snow that muffled sound and memory alike. Most folks didn't come this far north past first frost. Too wild, too lonely, too far from anyone who might care if you slipped and never stood again. But that's exactly why Elias Wren stayed. He wasn't dangerous. Just done. Done with the noise of towns, the questions, the looks. Out here, in the shadow of the Bitter Pine Ridge, his world was measured in firewood stacks and the slow thaw of the creek that ran behind his cabin. He chopped, hauled, fixed, fished. He didn't speak much, not to himself, not to anyone. There was no one to speak to. And he liked it that way, until the knock came. It was late March. The snow was thinning but still stubborn in the shadows. Elias had just come in from checking his traps when he heard it. 3 soft knocks on the thick wooden door he hadn't opened for a soul in nearly 2 winters. He thought he imagined it at first. Then came a voice, a woman's, shaky but strong. "Please, someone's sick." Elias opened the door slowly, lantern in hand. Standing there in the pale light was a woman, face red from cold, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, 3 small children huddled behind her. 1 boy, 2 girls, all of them trembling, all of them exhausted. The boy clung to her skirt, coughing so hard his knees gave out. Elias stepped back without a word and motioned them inside. The woman hesitated, eyes darting, unsure. Then he said, voice deep and quiet, "You don't have to stay, just don't freeze." That was all it took. She guided the children in, helping them toward the hearth as Elias fed the fire, adding another log. The cabin filled with warmth and flickering shadows. She didn't speak for a long time. Just tended to the boy, wrapping him in blankets, giving him sips of water. The 2 girls curled up near the fire, too tired to cry. Finally, when the boy had fallen asleep, she looked up at Elias. "My name's Clara Bell," she said. "We were headed south. My husband passed last summer. We've been walking since the ox died 2 days ago." Elias didn't ask questions. He just nodded once. "I have stew," he said simply. "It's not much." She nodded gratefully. "It's more than we had." That night, he gave them his bed and slept in the corner on old hunting blankets. He barely slept at all. Not from discomfort, but from the strangeness of having voices in the room again. Breathing, movement, life. He told himself it was temporary. 1 night, 2 maybe, just until they could move on. But as he watched the boy stir, listened to the soft murmurs of Clara soothing her daughters, Elias realized something deep in his chest. The silence he once worshipped didn't feel quite so holy anymore. The morning came slow and pale, sunlight barely breaking through the frost-coated windows of Elias's cabin. Clara stirred first, rising quietly from the bed she hadn't slept in, just watched over, all night long. Her son's fever had broken sometime before dawn, and now he breathed easier, soft, slow, and warm under thick quilts. Elias had already been up. He always was. She found him outside, splitting wood like the world depended on it. She pulled her shawl tighter, walking a few cautious steps into the chill. "He's better. Your fire probably saved him." Elias didn't look at her directly, just nodded once. Clara waited a beat. "You don't say much, do you?" He finally looked up. Axe paused mid-swing. "Not when there's more to listen to." She tilted her head, unsure if that was a warning or a kindness. "Maybe both." "Then I guess I'll try not to fill the air too much," she said softly. Elias said nothing, but when he chopped the next log, the blow wasn't as sharp. Inside, the girls had begun to talk. Not loudly, just whispers, nervous giggles, questions about the strange man with the beard, and how he always looked like he was about to wrestle a bear. Clara smiled faintly, watching from the corner. The cabin wasn't much. A single room, a corner loft, a wash basin, shelves lined with dried herbs and hand-carved tools. But it was solid, and after so many nights on cold dirt with stars as their ceiling, it felt like a castle. She washed what few clothes they had, rewarmed Elias's leftover stew, offered to sweep. "You don't have to," Elias said when he caught her folding his blankets. "I know," she said, "but I need to feel useful." That seemed to settle something in him, and for the first time he asked, "How long were you on the road?" Clara hesitated. "Since September." His brow lifted slightly. "Through the high pass?" She nodded. "With 3 kids?" Her voice cracked. "With no other choice." Elias didn't ask anything else. But he didn't leave her to make supper alone either. That night, as the fire crackled low and the children slept in a pile of limbs and blankets near the hearth, Clara sat across from Elias with a cup of warm water in her hands. "You don't have to let us stay," she said softly. "I know this isn't permanent." Elias looked at her a long moment, eyes unreadable beneath his brow. Then he said, "The weather's not done turning, and they still need food. You're not going anywhere until I see green again." Clara blinked back tears she hadn't prepared for. "You're kind," she said. "I'm not," Elias answered. "But maybe I forgot what company feels like." And as the wind howled outside but the cabin stayed warm, she didn't argue with him. Because some silences don't need to be broken. They just need someone willing to sit inside them. The snow lingered for 2 more weeks. Not heavy, just stubborn, clinging to the edges of the trees and the roof like the past clings to a memory you never spoke out loud. Clara and the children stayed. Not because they asked, but because Elias never said otherwise. And though words were few, the rhythms of life in that cabin began to shift, subtle as the thaw in the woodpile, certain as the melt in his heart. Clara began keeping the fire going without being told. She repacked his hunting kit with quiet efficiency, darned the holes in his spare socks, tidied the shelves with the instinct of a woman who'd once held a household together and couldn't stop even if she tried, Elias noticed. Not because he asked for help, but because he no longer had to do everything alone. He returned one afternoon with a brace of rabbits and found the children laughing over a pot of bubbling stew Clara was experimenting with. His old spices, untouched for years, now danced in the air. He paused at the door, confused by how strange it felt to smell joy. Later that night, as the kids slept, Clara sat with Elias by the fire. She was stitching a tear in one of the girls' dresses. He was sharpening a knife by the dim lantern light. "You've lived here long?" she asked. "7 winters," he replied. "And before that?" He didn't answer right away. "Another place," he said. "Another man, maybe. Doesn't matter now." She didn't pry. She understood that kind of silence, so she offered her own truth instead. "My husband was kind. He just believed too long that hope alone could feed a family." Elias glanced at her. She smiled sadly. "We didn't make it through the second drought. He caught fever after the baby came. And I had to keep going because 3 little hearts didn't know how to stop." Elias studied her, then looked toward the hearth where the children lay, curled like kittens in safety they hadn't known for months. "You did more than keep going," he said quietly. "You got them here." Clara blinked hard, caught off guard. "Maybe I did," she whispered. "Maybe I just didn't want to fall apart where they could see it." From then on, something shifted between them. Not spoken, not named, but real. Like the way Clara started setting out 2 cups of water in the morning instead of 1. Like the way Elias always brought in just enough wood so the girls wouldn't have to shiver before sunrise. It wasn't romance, not yet. But it was belonging. The kind that sneaks in when you least expect it and quietly changes the shape of your solitude. By mid-April, the last snow finally gave way. Drips of meltwater pattered from the eaves of the cabin. The creek behind the hill sang louder every morning, and the forest smelled like thawing earth and pine bark, like something old waking up again. The children ran freer now, no longer wrapped in 3 layers of worn coats. They helped Elias collect kindling, and Clara plant the first of the onions near the side shed, where the sunlight hit just long enough. Elias built a new wood box just outside the door, twice the size it needed to be. "Why so big?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Because you're still here," he said simply. "And there's 4 more hands splitting now." She didn't laugh, but she smiled with something deeper. One afternoon, the boy, Micah, the middle child, came inside with a scraped knee and tears he tried hard not to let fall. Elias knelt beside him, silent, then handed him a carved wooden figure from a small shelf near his tools. A bear, smooth and heavy in the boy's palm. Micah blinked. "What's it for?" Elias said. "To remind you you're stronger than you feel." Clara watched from the corner, heart in her throat. Later that night, when the children were asleep, she whispered, "You're good with them." Elias shrugged. "Takes quiet to listen, right? Kids speak in things they don't say." Clara reached over and placed a folded blanket at his feet. "You ever think about having a family?" she asked, instantly regretting the boldness. Elias didn't flinch. "Used to," he said. "Before life taught me not to count on things staying." Clara looked down. "Me too." And for a moment, both of them sat in the hush that follows truth. The next morning, Clara found something on the kitchen shelf, a hand-carved wooden spoon. New, the handle engraved with a small leaf pattern. Hers. Elias didn't mention it. He just left it where she'd find it. And that night, when he passed her a bowl of stew, and she used the spoon without a word, it meant more than any spoken promise could have. Because love doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a spoon you didn't expect to be yours. Sometimes it's someone making space for your hands. Sometimes it's silence that finally feels full, not empty. And Elias was starting to realize maybe this family wasn't just passing through. Maybe, just maybe, they were already his. The rain came next, soft and cold, waking the forest with gentle drumming against the roof. Clara stood at the window with a steaming mug in her hand, watching the drops streak down the glass like thoughts she couldn't quite speak. Behind her, the children were drawing with charcoal and paper scraps on the floor, whispering secrets and giggling the way only children could after surviving too many miles of silence. Elias was outside, covered in sawdust. He'd been working for 3 days on something he wouldn't name. When Clara asked, he only said, "Fixing something that ain't broke but still missing." By the end of the week, the rain gave way to light again, and Elias set it down on the porch without fanfare. A second rocking chair, hand-carved, sturdy, a twin to his own. Clara stood beside it, blinking back emotion. "You built this for me?" she asked softly. Elias didn't look at her, just kept fiddling with the grain on the armrest. "Didn't seem right, me rocking alone." She smiled, slow, full, then sat. It fit her like it had been waiting for her all along. And for the next hour, they rocked together in silence. Nothing pressing, nothing promised, but something real and settling. That evening, as the sun bled orange into the tree line and the air carried the scent of pine and ash, Clara spoke without turning to him. "You know, I don't think we're passing through anymore." Elias kept rocking. "I know. You okay with that?" He let out a slow breath. "You've built more in this house in 1 season than I did in 7 years. I'd be a fool to ask you to leave." She turned her head toward him, voice trembling but firm. "We don't want charity, Elias. We want to be wanted. There's a difference." He looked at her then, really looked. "You are." That night, she moved their sleeping rolls from the floor into the loft, one at a time, as if the act itself meant something more than words could say. Elias didn't stop her. He just carved another spoon, one for the oldest girl this time, and placed it beside her plate the next morning, because something sacred had begun growing inside that cabin. Not in loud declarations or urgent romance, but in wood and warmth and shared space. And when Clara swept the dust from the porch that evening, she did it like a woman tending not to someone else's house, but to her own. Spring had begun to color the edges of the forest. Buds on the aspens, birdsong echoing through the hills, and the steady rhythm of life inside the cabin growing gentler, deeper, more complete. Clara tended a patch of herbs behind the shed. The children helped Elias build a chicken coop from salvaged wood. Laughter had returned to the woodsman's life. Not loud, but constant, like the trickle of the stream behind the house. Elias caught himself smiling more often. Not wide, not showy, but real. Then came the rider, dust-covered, hunched from days of travel, leading a horse that looked near collapse. Elias saw him first, from the tree line while hauling a trap. His body stiffened, not with fear, but the old habit of a man who used to expect danger from every shadow. He stepped forward just as the stranger dismounted. The man's face was thin, weathered, his coat torn, but his voice, raspy, cracked, carried familiarity. "You Elias Wren?" Elias didn't answer right away. "Who's asking?" The man looked toward the cabin, then back. "A message from Dawson, from the South Ridge line." Elias's jaw clenched. Clara, hearing voices, stepped out onto the porch, children behind her. The stranger glanced toward them, then back at Elias. "Didn't expect to find you with people." Elias stepped between him and the porch. "This ain't a place for old scores," he said flatly. The man shook his head. "Ain't about scores, just something you ought to know. Dawson's gone. Took a bullet last winter." Elias was quiet. The name, Clara would learn later, belonged to someone from before. From the man Elias used to be. A different life, long buried. "What's this got to do with me?" Elias asked. "He left you a note. Said you'd know what to do with it." The rider reached into his coat and handed over a folded, dirty piece of paper. Then, without another's word, he mounted his horse and rode off the way he came. Clara watched Elias unfold the note at the table that evening. She didn't ask what it said. She didn't need to. She could see it in his eyes, a storm passing through an otherwise still man. Finally, he set the note down and said, "He saved me once, gave me a reason to stop running, and now he's gone." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You've stopped running, Elias. You stopped the day you let us in." He didn't speak, but his fingers curled around hers. Not in pain, not in memory, but in something anchored. That night, Elias stood on the porch under the stars, the letter in his pocket and the sound of Clara humming inside the house. For the first time in a long time, the past didn't feel like it owned him. It just felt like a road he'd walked to get here. And here wasn't lonely anymore. The snow had melted for good now, and the ground gave underfoot with the soft promise of growth. Spring had truly arrived, early wildflowers nudging up through the thawed soil, and Clara's once temporary garden stretching out in tidy rows along the eastern side of the cabin. Life no longer felt like survival. It felt like planning something for the future. Clara stood with Elias at the edge of a newly cleared patch of earth. "You sure you want to give this much of your land to potatoes?" she teased, hands on her hips. Elias looked at the turned soil, then at her. "They're stubborn. Grow deep. Feed well. Seem like the right kind of crop for this family." She smiled, broad, easy, natural. "So we're a potato family now?" He smirked. Could do worse. They worked side by side most of the morning, with the kids nearby chasing frogs and trying to build a scarecrow out of leftover firewood and an old shirt. At one point, Elias paused, watching them all. Clara humming while planting, the girls laughing over crooked sticks, Micah sitting with a book Elias had carved a wooden cover for. And it hit him. This wasn't borrowed time anymore. This was his life, their life. That evening, Clara brought out a small tin she'd kept hidden deep in her pack since the day she arrived. Inside were two things: a silver wedding band and a tiny paper drawing her daughter had made months ago, back when her father was still alive. She stared at the ring a long while, then stepped outside where Elias sat sharpening a blade, as he always did when something weighed on his mind. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about letting go of the things that kept me walking." He looked up, meeting her eyes with a gentleness that surprised her. "You don't owe me anything, Clara." "I know," she said, "but maybe I owe it to myself to stop carrying grief as proof I loved right." She placed the ring on the porch rail. "I loved him. He was good. But that love, it lived its life. It ended. And this," she gestured toward the cabin, the land, the children tucked inside. "This is something else. It's not starting over. It's starting real." Elias stood, and for once the man who had spent most of his life letting silence do the talking spoke. "I don't want to replace your past. I just want to give your future something steady to stand on." Tears slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe them. She just stepped forward, and Elias took her hand. There was no kiss that night, no grand gesture, just two people on a porch, surrounded by dirt and wood smoke and the laughter of children behind the walls, and one silver ring catching the moonlight, not forgotten but finally put down. It happened on a Sunday morning, just as the creek out back began to rush louder, and birdsong filled the clearing like a hymn. Clara was inside folding linens. Elias was showing Micah how to whittle. The girls were trying to coax a skittish chicken back into the coop. Then the sound came. Hooves, not a courier, not a lost traveler. And then the voice. "Clara! Clara Bell!" She froze. The linen slipped from her hands. Elias looked up, body tense before he even reached for the door. Clara was already outside, stepping off the porch, eyes wide and uncertain. A man sat atop a lean chestnut horse, dressed in a weather-worn but well-kept coat, clean-shaven, silver at the temples, late 40s, maybe 50, and familiar. Clara took one step forward. "Nathan?" The man smiled, though not warmly. "So it's true. You're alive." His name was Nathan Halford, her late husband's older brother, a banker from down near Redwater Ridge. Clara hadn't seen him in 4 years, since the funeral. "I heard rumors," he said, dismounting slowly. "A woman and 3 children begging their way through the passes. I didn't believe it, until I saw the boy." He nodded toward Micah. "Why are you here?" Clara asked, keeping her voice steady. Nathan pulled out a folded paper. "I came to settle something," he said. "Legally." Clara blinked. "Legally? You've been living on someone else's land, haven't you? Raising my brother's children in a stranger's home? No guardian? No church? No papers?" He looked toward Elias now. "You took them in?" Elias didn't answer. Nathan held out the paper. "A petition, signed by the judge in Redwater. I'm their next of kin. I can take them back, give them a proper life." Clara's breath caught. "No," she whispered. "You don't even know them." Nathan's voice softened, too softly. "And you're tired, Clara. You've done enough. Let someone else carry the burden." Elias stepped forward now, slow but sure. "They're not a burden," he said. "They're a family." Silence stretched. Then Nathan tucked the paper away. "I'll be back in 3 days, with the sheriff if I must." He mounted the horse again. "And Clara," he said before riding off, "you might love those children, but that doesn't make you their future." That night, Elias found Clara sitting at the creek alone, fists clenched, knees drawn up. "I should have seen this coming," she whispered. "He never wanted them when they had nothing. Now that they have something, he wants to claim it." Elias knelt beside her. "We won't let him." She looked at him, tearful, resolute. "They're not just mine. They're ours. This is their home now. I won't let him take them from that." Elias nodded once. "Then we stand together." The next morning he began carving something new. 3 name plaques, one for each child. Because this place wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was theirs, and they would fight. Not with fists, but with truth, love, and roots no law could pull up. The next 2 days passed like the calm before a storm. Clara moved through the cabin with a quiet urgency, packing nothing, but touching everything. She washed the girl's hair more slowly, braided it tighter. She kissed Micah's forehead twice instead of once before bed. Elias didn't speak much, but each day he rose before dawn to check the fence, fix the latch on the shed, and dig 2 extra rows in the garden. Not because he had to, but because he needed to remind himself that this place was alive, and no man had the right to uproot it. Even the children felt it, the tension. They whispered less, stayed closer. Something sacred had grown between these walls, and now someone intended to fracture it. On the morning of the 3rd day, just as the sun crested over Bitter Pine Ridge, Clara found Elias sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and a folded paper in his lap. She sat beside him without asking. "What's that?" she said softly. "My land deed," he replied. "Filed 5 years ago in Goldbridge. It's in my name, and this cabin sits right at its heart." Clara looked at him. "We're not married, Elias." "I know. Legally, I have no claim to be here." He turned to her finally, voice low but certain. "You don't need a paper to belong here, Clara. You just need to stay." She swallowed hard. "And if they still try to take the children?" Elias exhaled. "Then we make them see what this place is. What you've built. What they'd be tearing apart." Clara reached out and took his hand. She whispered. "We built this." Late that afternoon, the sound of hooves returned. But this time Nathan didn't come alone. Behind him rode a deputy in a crisp brown coat, looking half apologetic, half bored. Nathan dismounted first, holding the same document as before. "I gave you time to prepare," he said. Clara stood in front of the porch. "I'm not letting you take them." "You don't get to decide," he snapped. "You're not their blood." Elias stepped forward. "And you're not their home." The deputy cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Sir, ma'am, this doesn't have to get loud." Clara held out a bundle. Letters, notes, drawings. "These are their stories. Their growth, their healing. This is what you'd be ending." Micah came out holding his carved bear. The girls stood beside him with wide, watchful eyes. The deputy looked at them, then at Nathan. "Sir," he said slowly, "you may have claim on paper, but this," he gestured to the family standing united, "this isn't something I can break apart with a stamp." Nathan's face twisted. "So what? You'll just walk away?" "I'll write a full report," the deputy said. "That they're safe, loved, better off here." He turned his horse and left. Nathan, fuming, followed, defeated not by law but by something stronger, by belonging. That night, under a sky spilling with stars, Elias brought out something new. A simple wooden ring. He didn't get on one knee. He didn't speak a grand speech. He just looked at Clara and said, "I never planned to love again, but now I can't plan a life without you." Clara nodded, tears shining. "Then let's stop planning," she whispered, "and just live." The air was warmer now, sweet with pine and new blossoms, and life in the little clearing returned to rhythm. Only this time, it felt like music. Not just survival, not just healing, but a melody of something earned. Elias and Clara stood in the garden together, watching the children run through the high grass. The girls were laughing, Micah racing ahead with his carved bear tied to his belt like a badge of honor. "You ever think we'd have this?" Clara asked, hands resting gently on her hips. Elias glanced sideways. "No, but I started hoping for it before I even knew I was." Clara smiled. "You ever regret letting us in?" "Only that I didn't do it sooner," he replied. The wedding was quiet. No church, no preacher, just a clearing by the creek, a pine stump carved into an altar, and a neighbor from 10 miles down, an older widow who could still recall scripture and wasn't afraid to use it. The girls wore flower crowns. Micah held Elias's hand with the steady grip of a boy who had finally stopped drifting. Clara wore a dress she had sewn from old curtains, and she laughed when it caught on a splinter. Elias wore the same coat he had since the first frost, but cleaned, pressed, and missing the old patch on the shoulder. Clara had fixed that too. They exchanged no rings. But Elias gave her something better. A new spoon, carved from juniper, with her name etched on the handle. "It's not gold," he said. "It's us," she whispered. "That's more than enough." They feasted on rabbit stew and wild onions, toasted with creek water and apple preserves. And when the sun dipped behind the hills, Elias danced with Clara under the stars, slow, stiff, a little awkward, but no one watching would have called it anything less than beautiful. That night, when the fire crackled low and the children slept in the loft, Elias sat beside Clara, her head on his shoulder. "I used to think I was meant to be alone," he murmured, "that maybe some men were built for silence." Clara traced a line across his hand. "And now?" He looked down at her, heart full. "Now I know. Silence only meant I was waiting for the right voice to fill it." She kissed him gently, a promise without words. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by the soft breath of children, wood smoke, and dreams once thought lost, a family exhaled together. Years later, long after the last snowfall of that fateful spring, the cabin still stood, sturdier, larger, but with its original timbers still holding strong. The garden had grown twice the size. The porch now had 4 rocking chairs instead of 2, and beneath the window, the names of 3 children had been carved deep into the wood, letters worn smooth by time and love. A visitor riding up the narrow trail wouldn't find a lonely woodsman here. He'd find a home. Micah, tall now, with strong shoulders and a whittling knife of his own, sat by the edge of the creek, showing a younger cousin how to carve a fish. The girls, Lena and Ruth, were inside the kitchen with Clara, singing off-key and dusted in flour, preparing pie crusts for the evening meal. And Elias? Elias was mending a broken fence rail out back, same as always, but this time with help from a boy who called him Papa and wore his stubborn silence like a second skin. Clara watched from his porch, hand resting gently on her belly, now soft and full again, the beginning of another child, the last they hadn't expected. She never asked for more than peace. She never imagined a second chance. But life had offered it anyway, slowly, tenderly, and without fanfare. Sometimes healing doesn't come in rescue or riches. It comes in ordinary moments. A hand over yours at the table, the sound of laughter through cabin walls, a man who says little but builds everything with love in his bones. And sometimes, the greatest romance isn't the one you wait for. It's the one you build with both hands, after everyone else said you were too late.